Welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The Pen Leader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast. Today we have a show called Becoming More Than Your Past. And I am delighted to have with me Mr. Tom Seeman, who is the author of the national bestselling memoir, Animals I Want to See. He grew up in a family of 14 on welfare and food stamps in the projects of Toledo, Ohio. He earned a BA in economics from Yale, where he rowed on a crew team and graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa before going on to earn his JD at Harvard. Mr. Seeman has owned and led several businesses, currently serves on the board of directors and the executive committee of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Boston and on the board of trustees of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. He funded a scholarship that actively seeks disadvantaged students to attend St. Francis de Sales High School in Toledo, the school that generously gave him a scholarship and that he credits for helping him fulfill his dream of attending a top college. He has worked across the globe, has lived in 5 countries, and has traveled to over 100. He lives in Massachusetts with his wife, 4 children, and what I love, his 3 dogs and his cat as well. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so delighted. I got a chance to hear you talk about your book and your experience when you came to Rotary Club in Toledo. And it was very moving. And it was really a great experience of learning about how you've taken leadership and really to the next level and you've given back. But, before you had all the positions of power that you have now and influence, how have you led yourself, that self-leadership?
Yeah, I think I benefited from maybe an internal attribute of always being driven. So I was always driven to do really well in school, try to be the teacher's pet. Some people say, I had a bad father and a fantastic mother. And some people have theorized that maybe I was driven to be approved of by teachers and coaches, et cetera, because of my father, who didn't approve of things, who always tried to tear me down and tear some of my siblings down as well. I think I was one of his main targets because I was doing things and being maybe more driven than some of them. But he tore a lot of us down. I was driven to not be like him and to take myself and make myself more than that. Gradually, as your bio said, I was driven eventually when I got a little older to attend a top college. And I guess I didn't know what that would take, but I knew that good grades would help. So I was always driven in school to do really, really well. I benefited from that drive. Don't know if it was, once again, nature or nurture, whether I was born with it or whether I learned it by sort of dealing with my father, but also benefiting from my mother, who was also very driven and was very hardworking, always went the extra mile to make things special for her kids. Heard about her when I spoke the last time. Yeah, just a fantastic person. Still alive at 94, living in Sylvania, Ohio.
Tell me about how did learning discipline and responsibility early in life shape the fact and the way you make decisions right now? That, again, that discipline came out, especially in your writing and in your discussions.
Well, one thing that's funny about me is because I was poor and now I'm not poor, but I still live some aspects of my life like I'm poor. So I'm very careful about money. Like I'm willing to spend money. I'm very experience driven. So I spend money on experiences like travel, etc. But I won't spend money in small ways. So for example, I'll reuse tea bags 3 times before I'll throw them away, right? I will, even if somebody gives me tea and I don't love the tea, I'll drink it. I drink a lot of tea, by the way.
Oh,
I'll drink the tea until it's gone because I can't throw it away, right? And I can afford not to do that, obviously. So it's kind of funny how that has influenced me. But I would say the main thing that I learned from writing the book, mainly, I think I realized it all along, but from writing the book, I realized how many people along the way had done small acts of kindness, mainly in Toledo, and then gradually beyond Toledo when I got out, when I went to Yale. Those acts of kindness, while one particular act of kindness maybe didn't do something for me, but the sum total of all of those acts of kindness really did a lot to get me where I am today. And so I do try to do an act of kindness every day, even if it's small, right? Even if it's just letting somebody in traffic, where I used to be an aggressive driver. Now I let the person in, and think everybody should do things like that. Sometimes it's a big act of kindness, like, funding a huge scholarship at St. Francis for students in need. Other times it's just small things, but I try to do something every day. And it has the effect, I think, of making me a happier person as well, right? I don't know if that goes to your question about leadership, but I do have a certain style of leadership. I don't know if it comes from my upbringing or not, but my style of leadership, I've been CEO of several companies, and I've bought several companies, frankly, and I've become the CEO of those companies. And when I go in, I definitely don't go in, even though I'm a smart person, and I know all the answers, because I actually don't know most of the answers, because it's a company in an industry often where I've never even acted before. And so the people in the company know the answers, and they need to be able to, they need the opportunity to be able to give those answers to me. And so what I did when I bought one company, for example, the prior leader had been very dominant. And when I came in, I would ask, one of my direct reports a question about what I should do on something. And then I would ask another person the same question. And at first they thought I was trying to compare their answers and catch someone out or play people against each other. But they gradually learned I was just trying to gather all the input from the people that knew the business and then make my decision. I still would make a decision, and it wouldn't please everyone, but they all felt heard. And I think
Yes.
that company took off after I took over, and grew and grew. And I eventually sold it to Nomura in Japan. So it was a pretty good company, obviously, for it to be bought by a giant public company in Japan. So that style has worked well for me in every company.
I think that you're also addressing here a couple of components. It does address the leadership, your style, and the fact that you're listening to who's there as they are the experts. And I say this to leaders quite a bit. When you go into any kind of company, or you yourself run a company, and you hire talent, but you don't listen to the talent that's there,
Right.
you're leaving money on the table. Why did you
Oh my
hire them?
gosh.
You know what I mean?
I've seen it so many times, or people, yeah, people that come in and they just want to dominate meetings or something like that. I definitely don't do that. I definitely have the opposite style. Even though I have a strong personality, you can say I'm a strong presence. And sometimes people say I'm even scary, which I don't mean to be, but I try to tamp that down. And as the company succeeds, just like a football team or something, success just brings people along, and it cures a lot of problems, right? And so as they see the success occurring in the company or on a team or whatever, everybody gets happy real fast.
That's true. It's momentum, right? It takes off.
Yes.
Yeah, I talk about care. I mean, what you're showing there is exhibiting care, caring what other people are thinking and allowing those voices to come through. And that's communication. And people know, and have read my book, I talk about the 3 C's. And ultimately, you have a civil conversation with individuals. You're listening, there's turn taking involved. And even if you don't agree, they could bring something to you and you don't agree with them. At least you're giving them a chance to say, well, this is why I'm thinking this, or why I would
Right.
suggest it, right?
And I discovered this, style of leadership over time. So when I first started, so I worked at McKinsey and Company, which is a big, well-known consulting firm around the world. And when I first joined, I was still very sure of myself and very dominant in my approach. And I remember very early in my first year, we were off doing a training session, and my idea did not get adopted by the group. And I sort of had the attitude, well, if you're not going to take my idea, well, then, I'll let you to it, And the leader, a more senior person in the firm, approached me and said, you must stay engaged. You don't have the option of disengaging. Like, that's not an appropriate response. And I've always remembered that, that just because when I'm not the leader, just because my idea doesn't get adopted by the group, even though I think it's the absolute right idea, as I always did back then when I was young, I had all the answers, right? I learned you can't disengage. You must stay engaged.
Talk to me
Yep.
about what is it that's different from your past? How did your past influence your leadership style right now? I know you talked about being a little bit more, careful, reusing things, using them to the ultimate when they're used up. But how are other components of your past really influenced your approach?
Well, what I just said about disengaging once my idea wasn't adopted, I think that comes from growing up in the projects and needing to be strong and needing to be certain. The projects, it has a lot of pluses, has a lot of great things in that community, and I talk about that in the book, but it also has a lot more violence, a lot more dominance of one over the other, et cetera. And so I think I learned that I had to be right, or I had to be really strong from that background. And that's what I had to think overcome. As I said, that's what I had to overcome, was this idea that if I'm not leading or winning, well, then I'll leave you to it. I had to engage in the group even when I wasn't the leader. And that's something I think I learned that was a bad thing to learn about leadership. It was a negative thing, that dominance thing.
Was there anything that you thought with your leadership and how it was shaping, that anything is possible? Was there a time when you thought anything's possible? I could do this.
Oh my gosh, that's kind of what the book is about, is that I had this sense of wonder, from a very early age, and I always believed anything was possible. In the book, I talk about at a very young age, I thought I would be either the heavyweight champion of the world, like Muhammad Ali, who was someone that I admired, even though I didn't even box, right? It's so funny that I would think that, or the president of the United States, or the richest man in the world, right? I thought I could be any of these things from a very young age. So I had this sense that I was going places, or I had the option of going places. And that's where the title of the book comes from. Animals I Want to See was a list that I kept from a young age about animals that I wanted to see in the wild around the world. And I'm a little kid with no money in the projects. And how am I going to be thinking that I'm going to be traveling around the world seeing these animals? But I thought it was a real thing, and it has become a real thing. But why would I think that back then? And it was this innate confidence that I had that I was going to get out and be a big success.
Mm-hmm. So it came in over time. You just saw, well, you know what? I'm just going to put this down, because that's at a very early age to make this determination that this was your goal, and you documented that, right?
Yeah, and I didn't. I would say it did come to me over time. I would say I was confident from the beginning, and I've always wondered, and I've been asked that question a lot: was that innate, or did I learn that? And I say, well, I grew up in a family of 12 kids and two parents. That's where the 14 comes from, and they're all by the same parents, and we lived in this small house in the projects, and they were raised the same as I was. But of course, I had different teachers. Maybe I had different friends. I don't know if I learned that confidence, or if I just always had it from birth. Some of my siblings say I was, very competitive, and sometimes a difficult sibling to have, because I was so driven to win. My mother was asked a while ago about something about me when I was young, and she said, Tom liked to win. It's very simple. You know what I mean? I think, difficult for some of my siblings in that way, but I always had that confidence and that drive to win, and the belief that I would.
I think there's something said about, when you're born with tendencies, born with a drive. But I do think your environment sounds like it shaped you too. When you make just a little of investment of time into someone who already has a tendency to be competitive, to have the drive, the want, it goes so much further. And it sounds like that's what happened when you got your first scholarship to go to St. Francis.
Well, I think all along the way, people recognized in me that people that wanted to help me, I think that they thought if they invested in me, it might turn into something. They weren't sure it was going to turn into something. So I had people all along the way. So, for example, I had this librarian at the downtown library. I used to go to the downtown Toledo library and do a lot of my work there on the weekends. And this librarian there, Don Barnett, sort of adopted me and would help me with when I had to do research, and would teach me how to do research and stuff like that. He didn't really know that much about my life, but he could tell from my clothes and stuff probably that I wasn't very advantaged, but he didn't know my whole circumstance. And when I got into Yale, he was shocked, because he was investing in me, but he probably thought, oh, this guy will be reasonably successful. He didn't know that I would get that far, I think. And I remember how pleased he was, and he gave me a gift of books when I graduated from Yale, and also when I graduated from Harvard. So I stayed in touch with him. Unfortunately, he's now gone, but people like that helped along the way, invested in me. And then, yes, the famous opportunity at St. Francis came along. All the siblings before me in my family went to the public high school, which was Woodward, and one of my brothers went to Macomber when it still existed. I wanted to go to a private school, basically a Catholic school in Toledo. And I calculated from my jobs and from my paper route that I could afford to pay for Central Catholic, because it was the least expensive school. And when I took the Catholic school's admissions test to see that I could get in, I checked the box for Central, and then I saw the box for St. Francis, which to me was the epitome of the schools. It was the best in my mind. It was the college prep school. It had that reputation. It was the all boys school where you wear a coat and tie. I didn't think I'd be able to go there because I couldn't afford it. I was unaware of the idea of scholarships. And so I took the test, checked the box for St. Francis and Central, and Father McMenamin came from St. Francis to my school and called me to the principal's office, and I thought I was in trouble. And there he was, and he said, "Why did you check Central?" And I explained I could afford it. And he said, "Well, what if I told you that you could come to St. Francis for I'm tearing up a little bit here for free?"
Hmm.
And so that changed my life.
I think when you're talking about that experience of someone just pulling you aside and saying, come over here, you have an opportunity, especially when you have a dream of attending and it seems far reaching, but the fact that you were working on a goal at least to try to help pay your way to get somewhere, and then someone said, well, let me help you.
Yeah, I mean, the reason it changed my life was, in the projects, I'm surrounded by my buddies. We had this little group of guys. We called ourselves the halves because half of us were black and half of us were white. And we were doing some things that were, you know, crimes. If you really, we were doing things that you could get arrested for, right? And when I got to St. Francis, I'm suddenly surrounded by, at the lunch table by, kids that talked about stuff that I didn't talk about with my friends or my family, things about history and politics and religion and, but they knew all these things that I didn't know, and they would bring up topics and we would discuss them. And so I quickly shifted to this new group of friends that had that brought all this striving, I would say, striving
Yes.
for knowledge and striving to do better. And you would compete to get the best grade. I was in the top class because I had scored so well on the test. And so I was competing with the top kids in the school to get the best grades. At my old school, I didn't have that. I didn't have that kind of environment. And that kind of environment drove me to work harder and harder, so much so that I would, every day after school, I would go down to University of Toledo and I would go to the library there. In those days, you could actually just walk in. You know what I mean? They didn't,
Yes.
you know what I mean? It was like
You
no
didn't have an
security stuff.
ID. Yeah.
And I would go sit up there and I would work after football practice, and I would go up to the library and work on my calculus problems, and I would do extra calculus problems into the night until the very last Toledo bus was going to leave. The Bancroft bus was going to leave from the front of the university, and I would run out to the bus and catch the last bus, change buses downtown to the Stickney bus, get dropped off at the end of Bronson Street, and walk down Bronson Street to home. And then my mother would be waiting for me, at 11 p.m. and make me some food. And I would go to bed and get up at 6 a.m. and do it all over again every single day like that. And that's what St. Francis sort of put into me and drove me to do. And my innate drive as well, obviously. I had to be pretty driven to do that.
Yes. I'm a public school graduate, but
Okay.
but
Which
from
school?
mommy, I'm a Panther.
That's a pretty fancy public school.
Yes, I was privileged to acknowledge the fact I had a great experience in that. But I also had someone who said, "Come over here. There's a scholarship that you should apply for." And there were at that time it was called the 50 Men and Women of Toledo.
Okay.
And I interviewed for the scholarship and I went through the process and I got my full scholarship through the process of them putting a little time. I was fully prepared to try to pay my way through school. It was going to be harder.
Right.
I was going to have, and at the time I really wanted to go away, but I actually had the experience of being able to go away because of that scholarship. And I look back and I still run into some of the 50 that are still alive, some of them. And it's amazing. They're like, you are our hope, our dream. And I take that to heart and I try to pay it forward as much as I can. And I think that's what you're doing with your scholarship. I have to ask you, what, with all of this experience that you've had, you've owned companies, you've done so much work, and you've written this great memoir that you can find. So I encourage you to go out to get this book. What are you reading or what are you watching? Like, what encourages you?
Well, one of the funny things that I watch is I watch Survivor with my daughter. And what I like about Survivor is that it's this social experiment, but it shows you that a lot of times in life, the weaker people on the tribe try to vote the stronger players off so that they can win the prize in the end. And in life, that happens a lot. I used to think when I was little that if you just got good grades and you did everything right, that you would succeed. But there are people lurking who are more political than you are, I would say, and do things to sabotage you or to pull you down or to mess up your career or your life or whatever. And I never knew that when I was young. I just thought, once again, it was more pure than that. And being introduced to the realities of the world through business, et cetera. In school, it was fairly pure, I'd say, at Yale and Harvard. But after that, entering the workforce and finding people maneuvering, and one guy I know was described in a big company as a survivor. He always survived no matter who changed at the top and stuff. It was because not because he was talented at doing his job, he probably was somewhat, but because he was very political and very good at, as they say, kissing up, maybe kicking down, as the old saying goes. And I'm just fascinated by that, and not that pleased by it, frankly. I wish the world didn't work that way. I wish it worked on merit and that the best people always moved up in these organizations, but it's just not true. And that's what happens on Survivor. And I watch it all the time with my daughter, and we watch people vote, scheming against the best players and trying to get them out. So the best player, in a sense, maybe doesn't win unless you say the game includes not just being the best player on the physical side of things, but also on the what they call the social side, but I call it's partly political. It's not just social, it's political, right? It's playing things right with people. Yeah.
I agree. The politics of it. Yes, I've watched that. My father called it as crabs in a bucket. For one that would come out and then you can't get ahead of me. I'm going to pull you down, which is that kick down. I think what you just mentioned,
Uh-huh.
and I'm going to try to make. I'm going to get up and over and climb over. Really,
And then watching your own kids also learning, this how the world really works. It's a little bit sad and heartbreaking because they believe it's pure and it's not, and watching them learn the realities, the first time they have a bad boss, or the first time they don't get what they really deserve, or what I think they deserve for their hard work and their purity, et cetera. That doesn't work in the real world. The real world is a tough place with people maneuvering all the time in different ways. And that's one thing I'm probably not good at, is the political side of things. I've gotten better, but I'm and maybe that's why I went out and bought companies once I had enough capital to buy my first company. Maybe that's why I did that, because I'm more in control and on my own and don't have to worry about the politics of working in a large entity. Maybe that's why I ended up there. It's worked out well for me financially and
yes,
my family and all, but maybe that's why I ended up there.
it's excellent. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and just sharing all of those experiences. And again, if you need, for my listeners out there, you're like, I'm not sure where St. Francis is, and I'm not sure about Toledo. We're in Ohio. But again, for those that are all over the world listening, the points that are shared today apply across the board. It doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, if you're within an organization, if you're trying to climb the ladder, the experiences, where you come from is not necessarily where you land, and your motivation and what drives you. Keep that in the forefront. Don't give up on that, and look for the helpers. Again, I can quote someone like, look for the helpers. I think that's Mr. Rogers, isn't it? Look for the helpers.
Is it? I don't even know.
And so I'd like to thank our listeners for catching the show and sharing it. We appreciate you, and we appreciate our sponsors. Thank you to J. Foster Jewelers, family owned, offering the finest natural gemstones, stunning engagement rings, and brilliant diamonds. And Mr. Brian Davis for all of your home, auto, or life insurance needs. Contact Brian Davis at State Farm. Like a good neighbor, Brian is there. And of course, until next time.
The Pen Leader podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Mays & Associates Ltd., creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Pen Leader podcast and share with others.